Best Picture.
Right.
And Howard Koch, who's normally a very cool...
Some Hollywood romances pass like a breeze. Others stay like ink once etched, never erased. At 95, Clint Eastwood, the man of silent horizons and wind-carved faces, looks back and admits there are 6 women he can't forget. Each is a chapter. Together, they form a novel of fame, betrayal, tenderness, and lessons paid in time. We begin with Sondra Locke, not a chapter, but a full, conflicted novel, rapturous love, quiet power, the mirage of home, and, in the end, lawsuits that stretched on and on. It started in 1972 when Locke and Eastwood met through a mutual friend named Joe. At the time, Locke was married to Gordon Anderson, her childhood best friend. Theirs was a platonic marriage because Anderson was gay. Yet legally valid throughout Locke's life, Locke auditioned for Breezy and was rejected as too old. Still, the spark didn't die. In 1975, Eastwood cast her in The Outlaw Josie Wales, and from there, craft bled into intimacy. Locke would star opposite Eastwood in 6 films: The Gauntlet, Every Which Way But Loose, Bronco Billy, Any Which Way You Can, Sudden Impact, and earlier, Josie Wales. In those incandescent beginnings, Eastwood half-joked he'd never been faithful because he'd never truly been in love, but with Locke, he felt suddenly monogamous. She believed him, enough to take a pay cut on Josie Wales just to stand beside him. They moved between roofs in Sherman Oaks, bare Northern California, and Carmel. The bare mansion bought by Eastwood became Locke's pride. She remade it as their home, yet beneath the polished floors, fissures spread. Locke didn't want to remain merely an on-screen muse. She wanted to direct, to step beyond Eastwood's shadow. She later said Eastwood discouraged her from working with others. Her directing bids Rat Boy, 1986, and Impulse 1990 were supported in name, yet often met creative friction. Locke also said Eastwood persuaded her into 2 abortions and a tubal ligation. Because he didn't want more children, Eastwood denied coercion, saying those were her decisions, whichever side one takes. The crack had set by the late 1980s. Distance widened Eastwood and Carmel. Locke in Los Angeles, growing lonelier by the day. In April of 1989, while working on Impulse, she came home to find the locks changed and her belongings in storage. A letter from Eastwood's lawyers addressed her as Mrs. Gordon Anderson. A blade-sharp reminder of her legal name. Locke fainted. The romance had hit bottom. In 1989, she filed a palimony suit, seeking support, property, and the share she believed she'd built. A year later, they settled. Eastwood arranged a development divided by directing deal at Warner Brothers worth $1.5 million, transferred the bare house, paid $450,000, and monthly support. In return, Locke dropped the suit. She later alleged the Warner deal was a shell, her pitches dead on arrival. The dream immobilized. In 1995, she sued again for fraud and breach of fiduciary duty. A year later, they settled quietly. Locke's directing career never recovered after Impulse. She drifted from Hollywood circles, losing friendships, including with Maria Shriver and Lily Feeney Zanuck. Meanwhile, She battled breast cancer, double mastectomy, chemotherapy. She wrote that the toxicity of the relationship ravaged her health. Eastwood, she said, never reached out a silence sharper than any verdict. She poured the pain into pages, the good, the bad, and the very ugly. Confessing her greatest regret was not leaving sooner. In 2018, Sondra Locke died at 74 of cardiac arrest linked to breast and bone cancer. In a final act of loyalty, she left an estate of about $20 million to Gordon Anderson, the partner on paper, who, in spirit, walked beside her all her life. As for Clint Eastwood, his story moved on, but the scar named Sondra Locke remained, not because she brought him peace, but because the storm she left is one he never truly escaped. To understand why Clint Eastwood's later years turned into a whirlwind, we return to the starting line. Maggie Johnson, no headlines, no tantrums. Maggie was the silent foundation beneath a skyrocketing career and the place where the first hairline cracks began. It begins in May of 1953. Maggie was a UC Berkeley student living in her sorority house. Clint had just left the military, searching for a path. A friend arranged a blind date in San Francisco, though Maggie already had a boyfriend. When she came down the stairs and Clint turned, her first thought was simply, wow, tall, striking, self-possessed. The spark was instant. They started dating, but Clint was far from devoted. Before moving to Los Angeles, he saw other women. One lived in Seattle and gave birth to Lori Murray, Clint's first child, placed for adoption without his knowledge. That December, under Christmas lights, Clint and Maggie married just months before Lori was born in February of 1954. The marriage began on a limp. Clint later called the first year terrible. He chafed at commitment. By many accounts, Maggie endured more than most. Rumors of affairs seeped in. Once, she asked him directly, "Are you fooling around?" and the talk usually ended with vague reassurances. In 1959, rumor became fact. Clint started a secret, long-running affair with stuntwoman Roxanne Tunis. For more than 14 years, Roxanne was an open secret. In 1964, she gave birth to Kimber while Clint was still legally married to Maggie. The public knew nothing for years. How much Maggie knew then remains contested. Even so, Clint and Maggie built a family. Kyle arrived in 1968. Allison followed in 1972. They dreamed of raising their kids away from Hollywood's glare, choosing Carmel by the Sea as refuge. Clint designed the house himself. Maggie poured herself into motherhood. On the surface, a picture-perfect home, sea air, warm wood, children's laughter, underneath long silences, arguments, and the quiet knowledge that the name Sondra Locke, rising mid-1970s, was changing the weather. Sondra's arrival turned cracks into rifts. The Carmel house, once a symbol of hope, grew heavy with tension. Maggie faced the fact that she was both wife and witness to a marriage sliding away. In 1979, they separated. In 1984, the divorce was final. Reports pegged the settlement at $25 million, a staggering figure then. But what made Maggie remarkable wasn't the number. It was how she exited. No public blame, no media crusades. Maggie chose quiet and focused on raising Kyle and Allison. For the children, family still came first. Allison later said that even post-divorce, Maggie kept Clint close as a father. refusing to split the kids with grown-up resentments. The other children, the hidden chapters, also returned. Lori Murray, born February of 1954 and adopted at birth, reconnected with Clint in adulthood. Kimber 1964 stood as another reminder of a double life during the marriage. How much did Maggie know? Unclear, but her composure was clear. She refused to weaponize those secrets. From time to time, Clint admitted he needed space and marriage room to roam, and in some quiet way, Maggie understood. Whether she understood to forgive or to save herself is unknowable. What we do know, when the curtain dropped, Clint's name attached to many loves, Maggie still stood there as the ground on which he built it all. Her dignity and endurance tell us as much about Clint as they do about her. For a mountain to stand, there must be a valley willing to hold it. Clint Eastwood's life has never been simple, especially when it comes to love. After Maggie Johnson, two names left indelible marks in very different ways: Roxanne Tunis, the woman of secrecy, and Jacelyn Reeves, the quiet lover who gave him two children the world didn't know for years. The story with Roxanne Tunis began in 1959 on the set of Rawhide. Clint was a rising TV star, already married to Maggie. Roxanne was a stuntwoman, unassuming, but with a quiet fire. She was married to Jack Watson Sheik Jr. Yet that didn't stop the spark. What should have been a fleeting affair lasted 14 years. He'd then, yet intense, in June of 1964, Roxanne gave birth to Kimber Lynn Eastwood, Clint's daughter. The story stayed buried, not only from the public, but, for a time, from Clint himself. He later admitted he didn't know about her birth until a year later, describing it as a moment that knocked the wind out of him. Though he provided financial help, their father-daughter bond remained faint, veiled by distance and silence. Through it all, Roxanne never sought fame. She led a modest, quiet life. Rarely speaking of Clint, after Hollywood, she moved to Denver, taught meditation, and embraced peace. In June of 2023, Roxanne passed away after a brief illness, aged 89. Her daughter Kimber revealed that Clint was devastated, as if an old, locked room in his heart had suddenly been opened. Kimber found her own way into Hollywood as a makeup artist, actress, and producer, saying, "I want to make it under my own name." Not as Clint Eastwood's daughter. Then came Jacelyn Reeves. The next quiet chapter. It was the mid-1980s. While Clint was still tied to Sondra Locke, Reeves, a flight attendant, met him at his Hog's Breath Inn in Carmel by the Sea. Amid laughter and music, conversation turned to chemistry, and chemistry to something neither could resist. Unlike his stormier romances, this one was private to the core. Reeves kept her distance from cameras, choosing calm. From that serenity came two children, bearing the Eastwood name, Scott Clinton Eastwood, born March 21st, 1986, and Catherine Ann Eastwood, born February 2nd, 1988. No wedding, no vows, just two lives carrying both the light and the shadow of a man too big for a single story. Clint never denied his children, but kept their mother out of the spotlight. Reeves raised them quietly, far from the noise, giving them the gift of normalcy. As adults, Scott Eastwood stepped into film but declared firmly, "I'm not here to ride my father's coattails. I have to climb my own mountain." He built his name through roles in Fury, Suicide Squad, and The Fate of the Furious. Catherine, more reserved, turned toward writing an independent film, keeping her privacy intact. What makes both women, Roxanne and Jacelyn, stand apart is how they left. No lawsuits, no revenge, no scandal, only silence. And somewhere, Clint once confided to a friend, "Not everyone who leaves disappears. Some stay in the parts of you you're afraid to touch." One woman was a secret spanning 14 years. The other, the mother of 2 Eastwood children. Together, they mirror Clint's duality, passion and escape, tenderness and solitude. By the late 1980s, Clint Eastwood's life was like a jazz tune, passionate, chaotic, and unpredictable. After the turmoil of Sondra Locke and the quiet affair with Jacelyn Reeves, a new presence entered Frances Fisher, the woman who would shift his rhythm once more. It was 1988 when Frances stepped into his life. An English actress with fiery eyes and a fearless heart, she had honed her craft on Broadway before Hollywood called. They met on the set of Pink Cadillac, but as she later recalled, the spark truly ignited at the pre-production party she glided in on roller skates, locked eyes with Clint, and said it felt like a missing piece sliding into place. Clint, famously laconic, simply smiled. They began seeing each other quietly. At the time, Clint hadn't yet fully severed ties with Sondra Locke, so their romance existed as a fragile secret. It wasn't until late 1989, when he finally ended things with Locke, that the relationship stepped into the open. Even then, Frances admitted she had no idea how tangled his life still was. Old bonds, lingering names, they haunted every new beginning. By the early 1990s, the couple appeared publicly calm smiles, interlaced hands. "I loved him deeply," Frances once said. "But for me, faithfulness isn't optional." That belief made their love beautiful yet brittle. On August 7th, 1993, in Redding, California, Frances gave birth to Francesca Ruth Fisher Eastwood. For a moment, it was as if Clint transformed. The man once allergic to permanence softened. Friends said he was often home, cooking, laughing, and doting on his daughter, a sight few had ever seen. It was a rare season of peace in his stormy life. But peace and Clint Eastwood have never been long-term companions. Within 2 years, cracks reappeared. Frances discovered he was still in touch with Jacelyn Reeves. And soon after, paparazzi caught Clint kissing another woman. The betrayal cut deep. Frances moved out, quietly ending the chapter. Later, she reflected, "A relationship may begin with passion, but survival requires 2 steady hearts. When one keeps wandering, the bridge collapses." By spring of 1995, they split. No lawsuits, no bitterness, just a quiet goodbye. They stayed close to co-parent Francesca, who would grow into a striking young woman, inheriting her father's composure and her mother's fierce eyes. She, too, entered film, appearing in some of Clint's projects but ultimately carving her own path. Frances Fisher, the flame-haired believer in love's absolutes, didn't crumble. She exited with grace, as if stepping off stage after a performance too real to continue. For Clint, the memory lingered bittersweet, steady, human, For a time, he had been a husband in spirit, even if not by law, and as with all his stories, it lasted just long enough to become a memory worth keeping. Then fate introduced Dina Ruiz, the next woman to bear the title wife, a chapter that began with laughter and ended in quiet heartbreak when Frances Fisher left. Clint Eastwood was past 65 in age when most men look for calm, but calm was never part of his nature. Then came Dina Ruiz, young, bright, self-assured, and unlike anyone who came before her, they met in 1992. When Dina, a local news anchor for KSBW in Carmel by the Sea, interviewed Clint for a community segment, she was barely in her 20s. He was already an icon actor, director, and former mayor of the same town. The conversation was short, but it lingered. Dina recalled, "I expected him to be distant, but he wasn't. He was gentle, grounded, even a bit shy." Clint later said, "We just clicked like we'd known each other forever. I thought, this woman isn't like anyone else I've met." Fate brought them together again in 1994 at a social event in Spanish Bay. When someone asked Clint if he'd mind sitting beside Dina, he agreed instantly. That night, amid jazz and soft laughter, he held her hand, a small gesture that began a 20-year journey. By 1995, their relationship was no longer secret. Paparazzi captured them kissing at a golf tournament. The world was stunned. Clint Eastwood, the eternal bachelor, was getting married. In September, he proposed. By December, they obtained a marriage license in Haley, Idaho. But the wedding itself was pure Eastwood unexpected. While Dina was away on a girls' trip in Las Vegas, Clint arranged a surprise ceremony at the mansion of his friend Steve Wynn. Within 48 hours, Dina returned not as a girlfriend, but as Mrs. Eastwood. In December of 1996, Dina gave birth to Morgan Eastwood, Clint's youngest and final child. To the public, they were a perfect match. The calm legend and the spirited journalist, Dina often called her husband the most humble, kind man I've ever met, even nicknaming him Saint Francis of Nature for gently carrying insects outside rather than killing them. For 15 years, their marriage seemed solid. They raised Morgan, appeared together in rare but warm moments. And Dina once said, "The longest we've ever been apart is 10 days." For Clint, it was perhaps the most peaceful chapter of his life. But peace, once again, began to fracture. In 2012, Dina launched the reality show Mrs. Eastwood Company. Featuring her life and daughter, Clint rarely appeared, and his friend said he hated the exposure, seeing it as against his very nature. The disagreement quietly deepened. By summer, they shared a roof, but no longer a room. During that time, Dina reconnected with Scott Fisher, a basketball coach recently divorced and back from Australia. She insisted they were friends. But Fisher's ex-wife, Erica, thought otherwise. Erica reached out to Clint, and in a twist only Hollywood could script, Clint and Erica began dating. The revelation shattered Dina. In September of 2013, she filed for legal separation, then for divorce a month later. Yet Dina never turned bitter. She defended Clint in public, tweeting, "Clint is wonderful, kind, and brilliant. I never regret loving him. in 2016. She married Scott Fisher in Santa Barbara, gently closing that chapter. For a while, the world believed Clint had finally found lasting love, but Eastwood was never meant for stillness. After Dina, when he was nearing 90, another name entered his story, Christina Sandera. The final woman in a life written like cinema itself. When the last door of his marriage to Dina Ruiz closed, Clint Eastwood was nearing 90. Most men at that age accept solitude as destiny. But Clint Eastwood was never made for solitude. Just when his world seemed to settle, Christina Sandera appeared not as another starlet, but as a quiet presence, bringing with her something he had long lost: peace. Christina worked at Mission Ranch Hotel, the coastal property Clint had bought and restored in 1986 in Carmel by the Sea, the same town where he once served as mayor. He had poured years into rebuilding that place, not knowing it would someday bring him his final companion. Christina was not a celebrity. She was a restaurant manager, living simply far from the glamour of Los Angeles. What caught Clint's attention was not her beauty, but her serenity, something he had chased all his life but never truly found. There was no thunderbolt between them, only a gentle flame that refused to fade. Christina didn't treat him like an icon. She treated him like a man, one who laughed, aged, and grew weary. And for the first time in decades, Clint didn't have to be Clint Eastwood. He could just be human. By 2014, they quietly began appearing together. Then, in 2015, Clint took her hand at the Academy Awards, where American Sniper earned 6 nominations. Cameras flashed. But Clint seemed untouched by the frenzy. What mattered was the woman beside him, calm, smiling, real. From there, Christina became a constant at his side at the Sully premiere in 2016, at Cannes in 2017, and at the Mule premiere in 2018, standing next to his children and even Maggie Johnson, his first wife. It was a rare sight, the women of Clint Eastwood's life sharing the same frame, bound not by scandal but by grace. Christina remained modest, private, and unbothered by fame. She made coffee for him every morning, walked with him along the Carmel shore, and listened to the ocean crash against the same rocks where he had filmed Play Misty for Me half a century earlier. When asked what made their bond work, she said simply, "I never tried to change him. I just wanted to grow old with him." After decades of restless romances and 8 children, Clint finally seemed to understand what love without noise meant. With Christina, there were no storms, only stillness. Then, in July of 2024, tragedy came quietly. Christina Sandera passed away at 61. Due to cardiac complications, Clint reportedly withdrew into silence. Neighbors in Carmel said they saw him sitting on the Mission Ranch balcony for hours, staring toward the sea. A close friend later shared he didn't cry. He just said, "I loved her in a way I never loved anyone in silence." With Christina, Clint Eastwood found the final dawn of his story, not fiery, not tragic, but warm and forgiving, a gentle light at the end of a long, cinematic road. Carmel by the Sea. A windless evening. The Pacific glows gold beneath the setting sun as Clint Eastwood, now 95, sits alone on the porch of Mission Ranch. The air smells of salt and cedar, and within it, he feels the ghosts of 6 women who once shared his life. Each name is a season. Sondra Locke, the storm that swept through his wildest Hollywood years, leaving behind scars deeper than any courtroom could heal. Maggie Johnson, the first wife, the quiet pillar who watched him rise from nothing and left not in anger, but in the silence of understanding. Roxanne, Tunis, and Jacelyn Reeves, two hidden halves of the same confession. One carried a secret for 14 years. The other bore two children who carried his name into the future. Frances Fisher, the flame-haired actress who believed love could tame him, and for a moment, almost did. And Christina Sandera, the final chapter, the woman who asked for nothing, who brewed coffee at dawn and taught him what peace truly meant. 6 women, 6 seasons of a restless man. Some arrived in laughter. Some departed in tears. Yet all remained not as memories to recall, but as pieces of his soul. The man who once stared down gun barrels without blinking now trembles when he looks at his own hands, the same hands that have held, released, and lost too many. In one rare interview, he admitted, "I don't regret much, but sometimes, when the wind hits Carmel, I feel like calling a name, and I'm not sure which one." That sentence carried the weight of a farewell, for the cruelest thing about age is not loneliness, it's remembering too much. As the sea darkens and the horizon dissolves, Clint whispers into the wind, "They all taught me how to love, and they all taught me how to let go." Somewhere in the rhythm of the waves, one might hear echoes of his old films, the guitar cry of Unforgiven, the desert wind of the good, the bad and the ugly. The stillness of a man finally at peace, because in the end, even legends, Vater, only the people who once loved us remain in the quiet, in the heartbeat, in the frames that never stop playing. Carmel at night, a single star falls into the sea, and Clint Eastwood, the last cowboy of the silver screen, closes his eyes, as if his life's film has just reached its final, perfect scene.